The locals in the southern valleys of the Appalachians didn't call them Sasquatch. They called them Boogers, a deceptive, almost childish name for something that possesses muscles like braided steel and eyes that caught the moonlight like wet coal. Dean Stubbordson didn't care for local names, nor did he care for local warnings. True to his name, Dean was a man built on friction. The more people told him to avoid the isolated stretch of the Pisgah National Forest, known as the Black Shoulder, the more he wanted to plant his boots there. "It's just a 4-day loop," Dean muttered, adjusting the heavy straps of his Gregory pack. He looked back at his two companions, Marcus, a seasoned tracker who looked usually tense, and Chloe, Dean's younger sister, who was already second-guessing the trip. "We've done harder terrain in the Rockies. Stop looking like we're marching to a gallows." "The Rockies are open, Dean," Marcus said, his voice low as he stared into the dense, choking canopy of rhododendron and ancient hemlock. "You can see a threat coming from a mile away. Here, the woods swallow the light by 3 in the afternoon, and the air smells wrong." It did. The mountain air lacked the crisp, pine-scented sharpness of the high country. Instead, it carried a heavy, humid musk like wet dog mixed with the sweet, sickening tang of rot. They set off, leaving the marked trail within 3 miles to pursue a forgotten logging route that Dean had found on a 1970s topographical map. By the time twilight bled into the valley, the forest had gone completely silent. No cicadas, no tree frogs, nothing but the rhythmic crunch of their boots on dead leaves. They pitched their tent in a small clearing beneath a jagged rock overhang. As the campfire flickered to life, casting long, dancing shadows against the stone, the silence outside their circle deepened. Then came the first sound. It wasn't a growl or a roar, it was a sharp, metallic clack, then another. "What is that?" Chloe whispered, her hand freezing halfway to her water bottle. "Sounds like rocks?" "Wood knocking, or stone clicking," Marcus murmured, rising slowly to his feet. He reached for the hatchet resting near the firewood. "It's a hunting signal. They are ranging the perimeter." Dean scoffed, though a cold needle of adrenaline pricked his chest. "It's just the limestone cooling down from the daytime heat, Marcus. Relax." Dean stood up to prove his point. Stepping to the edge of the firelight, he shone his high-lumen tactical flashlight into the absolute black of the tree line. The beam cut through the mist, illuminating thick trunks, tangled briars, and then, for a fraction of a second, something else. 90 feet away, framed between 2 massive oaks, stood a silhouette. It was easily 8 feet tall, massive across the shoulders, with a discernible neck. But what froze Dean in place weren't the dimensions. It was the eyes. 2 large, unblinking orbs reflected the flashlight's beam. They weren't the green or yellow of a deer or a bear. They burned with a dull, intelligent amber-red glow. The creature didn't run. It slowly, deliberately, tilted its head to the side, and then, from somewhere deep within its massive chest, it let out a sound that vibrated the soles of Dean's boots. A low, rhythmic, human-like chuckle. The chuckle died out, swallowed by the dense mountain air, leaving a silence so absolute that Dean could hear the frantic ticking of his own wristwatch. He kept the flashlight beam locked on the space between the twin oaks, but the amber eyes were gone. The silhouette had melted backward into the dark without a single rustle of leaves. "Dean," Marcus said, his voice flat and dangerously calm. He hadn't moved from the fire, his hand white-knuckled around the hatchet handle. "What did you see?" "Bear," Dean lied, though his voice cracked on the vowel. He turned back to the camp, his face pale under the firelight. "Just a big black bear standing on its hind legs. It's gone." "Bears don't laugh, Dean," Chloe said. She was curled into a tight ball by the heat of the coals, her eyes wide. "I heard it. It sounded like a man trying to choke on something funny." "It was an auditory illusion," Dean snapped, the stubbornness in him hardening into a defensive wall. "The wind through the rock overhand. We're turning in. We have 12 miles to cover tomorrow to hit the ridge line." Nobody slept. Every hour was measured in the structural sounds of the forest, sounds that felt increasingly deliberate. At midnight, a massive thud shook the ground, like a heavy boulder being dropped from a great height just 50 yards away. At 2 in the morning, the metallic clack of stones returned, but this time it came from 3 different directions around their camp, a shifting triangle of noise that kept them pinned in the center. When the grey misty dawn finally broke, the camp was exhausted. Marcus walked to the edge of the clearing where Dean had shown the flashlight the night before. He called Dean over with a sharp whistle. The ground between the 2 oaks was torn up. The thick carpet of damp leaf litter had been pushed aside to reveal the dark earth beneath. Stamped into the mud was a track. It was nearly 18 inches long, shockingly wide at the ball of the foot, with 5 distinct, deeply pressed toes. But what made Marcus kneel down was the depth. The heel had sunk nearly 4 inches into the hard, packed soil. "That's not a bear, Dean," Marcus whispered, measuring it with his hand. "Whatever made this weighs upwards of 800 pounds. And look here." Marcus pointed to a sapling oak about 10 feet away. The trunk, as thick as a man's wrist, had been snapped clean off at a height of 7 feet. The break wasn't splintered by wind, it was twisted and sheared, the bark peeled back like skin. "It's a marker," Marcus said, looking up into the foggy canopy. "It's telling us we crossed the line. We need to turn back. Take the old logging trail straight to the highway." Dean stared at the broken sapling, his chest tightening, a primal instinct screaming at him to listen to the tracker. But his pride, the absolute refusal to let a local myth dictate his route, won. "If we turn back, we walk into the wind, and we're trapped in the low gully," Dean said, forcing a stern confidence into his voice. "We push up to the ridge. It's open rock. If there's something tracking us, we'll see it from miles away, and we can outpace it on the descent. Pack it up." By noon, the fog hadn't lifted. It had thickened, dripping from the hemlock needles like slow rain. The climb was brutal, a vertical scramble over loose shale and slick roots. The forest had shifted. The Boogers were no longer hiding their presence. They stayed just outside the visual range of the fog, moving parallel to the hikers. Every few hundred yards, the trio would hear the heavy, bipedal thud of footsteps mimicking their pace. Stopping, exactly, when they stopped. Then the mimicry changed. From the fog to their left, a voice called out, "Stop looking like we're marching to a gallows." It was Dean's voice, exactly his pitch, his inflection, but played back with a strange, flat mechanical cadence, as if a tape recorder were being spun by a dying battery. Chloe let out a sharp cry and stumbled backward, losing her footing on the wet shale. The sound of Dean's own voice echoing out of the grey void hit him like a physical blow. It didn't sound human. It sounded like an animal trying to shape its throat around words he didn't understand. "Did you hear that?" Chloe gasped, scrambling to her feet, her hands covered in slick, black mud from the shale path. "Dean, that was you?" "It's an echo," Dean lied, his voice dropping an octave as his mind scrambled for a logical explanation. "The valley walls can bounce sound around. Twist it." "Don't lie to her, Dean," Marcus interrupted, drawing his hunting knife. His eyes didn't leave the dense wall of white fog to their left. "That's a mimic. They do that to disorient the herd. They play with their heads before they move in." From the right, another sound cut through the mist. It was the distinct, sharp sound of a zipper, the exact pitch of Chloe opening her tent the night before. Then, a low, wet throat clearing noise that belonged to Marcus. The forest was throwing their own sounds back at them, building a claustrophobic wall of psychological pressure. "We move, now," Dean ordered, the stubbornness finally fracturing into pure survival instinct. "Keep your eyes on the ridge. Don't look into the trees." They broke into a heavy jog, their heavy packs bouncing violently against their spines. The trail narrowed, hugging the edge of a steep drop-off on the right, while a vertical wall of ancient limestone and choked rhododendron rose up on their left. It was a natural bottleneck. The parallel footsteps in the woods grew faster, heavier. The thuds were no longer cautious, they were aggressive, snapping large branches and rolling rocks down the slope toward them. Whatever was out there was running on two legs, moving through the impossible briars with the speed of a deer. Suddenly, Marcus stopped dead in his tracks, throwing his arm back to catch Dean's chest. 30 feet ahead, where the fog thinned slightly over a rocky outcrop, the path was blocked. Standing in the center of the trail was a massive creature. It didn't look like an ape, nor did it look like a man. It looked like a prehistoric nightmare. It easily cleared 8 feet, its body covered in a matted, dark cinnamon hair that was caked with dried mud and forest debris. Its chest was impossibly wide, a barrel of dense muscle that rose straight into a conical head. But it was the face that made Chloe lose her breath. It was hairless, the skin a dark, leathery gray. It had a heavy prominent brow ridge, beneath which those amber-red eyes burned with a terrifying malicious intelligence. The Booger didn't roar. It slowly reached out with an arm that swung past its knees, its massive 5-fingered hand gripping the trunk of a dead chestnut tree standing near the edge. With a casual, terrifying display of leverage, it pulled. The roots groaned and the 20-foot tree snapped at the base, falling across the path with a deafening crash. It was cutting off their escape. "Backtrack," Marcus yelled, but as they turned, a second, deeper chuckle vibrated through the mist from the direction they had just came. They were boxed in. To their left was the sheer cliff wall, to their right a steep 70-foot slide into a black, roaring mountain creek. The creature on the trail took a slow, heavy step forward. The air grew thick with its overpowering stench, the choking metallic stench of old blood and rot. It opened its wide mouth, revealing flat, human-like teeth, and then out a high-pitched, curdling shriek that tore through the valley like a siren. The shriek didn't just ring in Dean's ears, it vibrated in his teeth. It was a physical pressure, a sound so loud it seemed to flatten the fog around them. From behind, the second chuckle grew closer. The trap was closing. The creature ahead took another massive, deliberate step over the fallen chestnut tree. Its long arms swung loosely, the fingers curling into heavy fists the size of cinder blocks. "The creek," Marcus muttered, his eyes darting to the steep 70-foot drop-off on their right. "We can't find them. We can't go through them. We go down." "That slope is almost vertical," Chloe screamed over the echoing remnants of the shriek. "We'll break our necks." "We stay here. We don't have necks to break," Dean said. The stubbornness that had dragged them into this nightmare finally flipped into a cold, desperate focus. He gripped Chloe's pack strap. "On 3. Don't fight the slide. Just slide." Before Dean could even count, the Booger ahead lunged. For a creature of its immense size, its speed was unnatural. It covered 10 feet in a single blurring bound, its leathery face contorted into a mask of pure, primal aggression. "Go!" Dean roared. He yanked Chloe with him, throwing his weight over the edge of the trail. Marcus was already airborne beside them. They didn't fall. They slid, tumbled, and crashed down the steep embankment of loose shale, wet moss, and rotting logs. The mountain tore at them. Dean felt his backpack take the brunt of a massive impact against the boulder, snapping the frame but saving his spine. Rocks rained down around them as they slid blindly through the grey mist. Above them, a deafening roar of frustration ripped through the trees. A massive boulder easily the size of a car tire came crashing down the slope, snapping saplings in half as it tracked right for them. Dean kicked off a root, altering his trajectory just enough. The boulder roared past his left shoulder, missing him by inches, and smashed into the roaring creek below. An instant later, Dean hit the water. The mountain creek was icy and fast, swollen by recent rains. The shock of the cold sucked the air from his lungs. He gasped, swallowing a mouthful of churning water, before his boots found the rocky bottom. He broke the surface, spinning wildly in the current, and looked back. Chloe was dragging herself onto a gravel bar 10 yards downstream, coughing violently but moving. Marcus was already up, his face bloodied from a shale scratch, holding his hunting knife in one hand and pointing up the slope with the other. Through the shifting veil of mist at the top of the ridge, the two silhouettes stood side by side. They didn't follow them down the slide. They stood on the edge, their massive forms towering against the grey sky. The larger one, the cinnamon-furred beast, slowly raised its hand and wrapped its thick fingers around a low-hanging branch. With a sudden, violent jerk, it tore the massive limb free and hurled it into the canyon. It didn't land near the hikers, but the message was clear. This is our boundary. Do not come back. Move, Marcus wheezed, grabbing Chloe by her jacket. The creek leads to the old gorge trail. It's open. They won't follow us into the flats. They didn't run. They couldn't. but they marched through the freezing water, using the current to carry them away from the shadow of the black shoulder. Dean looked back just once before the creek bent around the mountain. The silhouettes were gone, but from high up in the foggy canopy, a final sound drifted down to them. It was Dean's voice again, faint and distorted by the distance, laughing a low, mechanical chuckle. Dean turned his head, fixed his eyes on the open valley ahead, and for the first time in his life, he did not look back.